If you are Native American, then a piece of your own family tree is buried in a hillside in Montana. His name, in science, is Anzac I. He was a baby boy, laid to rest about 12,600 years ago, covered in red ochre, surrounded by finely made stone tools. For decades, he lay forgotten under that hill. Then scientists read his DNA, and what they found connects this one ancient child to nearly every Native American alive today. So who was he, and how can he be related to so many? How can a single baby, buried more than 12,000 years ago, be family to peoples spread all the way from Canada to the tip of South America? That is the question at the heart of this story, and the answer rewrote one of the longest debates about who the first Americans really were. Start with how he was found. It was 1968, in western Montana, near the small town of Wilsall, on land belonging to a family named Anzac. Construction workers using heavy equipment were moving earth at the base of a rock outcrop when they uncovered something no one expected: the bones of an infant stained deep red with ochre, and around him, a treasure of ancient tools. There were more than 100 objects buried with that child, around 125 of them, beautifully made stone spear points and blades, and rods carved from antler. They were Clovis tools, the work of one of the oldest known cultures in the Americas. This was not a casual burial. It was a careful, loving, deliberate one. Someone wrapped this baby in red ochre and gave him a fortune in finely crafted tools to carry into the next world. People grieved for him 12,600 years ago, and here is what makes him unique. Anzac I is the only burial from the Clovis culture ever found. The Clovis people are famous for their distinctive fluted spear points, found at sites across North America dating back around 13,000 years. For a long time, they were thought to be the very first Americans. We have plenty of their tools, but of the people themselves, their actual remains, we have almost nothing. This one child is the exception. He is the only Clovis person we can truly look in the face, through his bones and his DNA. For decades after he was found, the science to read that DNA did not exist. The little boy's remains were kept, studied in the limited ways of the time, and waited. Then, in the 2010s, the technology finally caught up. A team of scientists led by Morten Rasmussen set out to do something that had never been done with a person this old in the Americas. They would sequence his entire genome, the full set of genetic instructions inside his cells. In 2014, they published the results in the journal Nature, and the findings were extraordinary. They compared the baby's DNA to the DNA of people from all over the world, living and ancient. And the pattern was unmistakable. Anzac I was more closely related to Native American populations than to any other group of people on Earth. Not Europeans, not Asians, Native Americans, specifically and overwhelmingly. It went further than that. The data showed that this single Clovis child belonged to a population that was directly ancestral to many of the native peoples alive today. He was especially close to indigenous peoples of Central and South America, but related to nearly all Native American groups. In other words, this was not some distant cousin from a dead-end branch. This was a direct ancestor of a huge share of the people indigenous to two whole continents. If a story that ties living people to the deep past is what you came here for, take a moment now and subscribe to Bedrock. The roots of this continent run deeper than almost anyone was taught, and we are here to follow them down. And stay close, because this discovery did more than connect one child to millions. It settled an old and bitter argument. For a long time, there had been debate, and sometimes worse than debate, about who Native Americans really descended from. Some researchers had floated the idea that the first peoples to arrive, like the Clovis, might have been a separate group that died out, replaced by later waves of migration. A few fringe voices went further and uglier, suggesting that today's native nations were not truly the heirs of the most ancient Americans at all. These ideas, intended or not, chipped away at native people's connection to their own deep past. Anzac I ended that. His genome proved deep, unbroken continuity. The people who were here at the very beginning, the Clovis, the first Americans, are the direct ancestors of the native peoples living here now. There was no great replacement. There was no lost first race. The line runs straight from a baby buried in Montana 12,600 years ago, to communities across the hemisphere today. The science confirmed what many native nations had said all along. They have been here since the beginning. The DNA also told a deeper origin story. Anzac One's ancestry traced back across the ages through Siberia and the ancient land bridge that once connected Asia and the Americas during the Ice Age. His people carried a signature shared with ancient Siberians, the trace of that long journey out of the old world and into the new. But the study showed that the split, the moment the ancestors of Native Americans became their own distinct people, had already happened well before this child was born. By 12,600 years ago, the first Americans were fully, distinctly themselves. There is another part of this story that matters just as much as the science, and it is about respect. For most of history, native graves and native remains were dug up, carried off, and studied with no regard for the living people they belonged to. Anzac One could have been treated that way too. Instead, the researchers worked with Native American communities in Montana. They shared the findings, and after the study was done, the little boy was not left in a drawer in a laboratory. In 2014, he was reburied, returned to the earth with ceremony by Native nations, given back the rest he had been pulled from. That reburial is its own kind of statement. It treated the child not as a specimen, but as an ancestor, which is exactly what the DNA proved he was. It is a model for how this work should be done, with consent, with care, and with the living descendants at the table. The science gained an extraordinary discovery, and the boy was given back his dignity. Both things mattered. Think about what this means if you carry native ancestry. That baby, wrapped in red ochre at the end of the last ice age, given 125 tools by people who loved him, is not a stranger. He is family. His genome is a thread that runs through countless living people across 2 continents. When researchers read his DNA, they were, in a real sense, reading yours too, and it reframes the whole story of this land. The footprints we have seen pressed into ancient mud, the cities raised in earth, the monuments older than the pyramids, all of it was the work of a people who never left. The Anzac child is the living proof, written in genetic code, that the first Americans and the Native Americans of today are one continuous people. Time immemorial is not just a phrase. It is now backed by the genome of a child. To understand the boy, you have to understand his people, the Clovis. For most of the 20th century, the Clovis were thought to be the very first Americans. They are known across the continent by their spear points, long and elegant, with a distinctive groove called a flute chipped up each face, fitted to wooden shafts for hunting big game. For decades, the rule was that nothing in the Americas was older than Clovis. We now know, from sites like the White Sands footprints, that people came earlier, but the Clovis were still among the great early cultures, and their tool-making was superb. The tools buried with the Anzac child show that skill. The points and blades are not rough or hurried. They are masterworks, some made of stone carried from far away, some of antler shaped with care. To bury more than 100 such objects with one infant was an enormous act. It speaks of grief, of love, and of belief in something beyond death. Whatever these people thought happened after life, they wanted this child to go there well equipped. The red ochre matters too. The boy was covered in it, the same kind of red mineral pigment that ancient peoples around the world used in their most sacred burials. Red, the color of blood and life, laid over a child being sent into the earth. Across thousands of years and thousands of miles, humans reached for the same gesture. The Anzac burial ties the first Americans to that deep shared human way of honoring the dead. When the geneticists looked closely, they also learned something about the structure of native ancestry itself. The first peoples of the Americas split fairly early into branches, and the Anzac child sat on the branch that gave rise to many of the indigenous peoples of Central and South America, while remaining closely tied to those of the North as well. In one small genome was written the deep family tree of 2 continents, its trunk and its great limbs visible at once. It is worth pausing on how rare and precious this was. Human remains this old are almost never found in the Americas, and almost never with the chance to read their full DNA. Anzac One gave science a once-in-a-generation window into the people of more than 12 1,000 years ago, not as a pile of stone tools, but as a person with a measurable place in the human family. He turned an entire ancient culture from an abstraction into an ancestor, and the way the work was done set an example. For most of history, the study of ancient native remains happened without permission and without respect, with bones carried off to distant museums against the wishes of living descendants. There is a famous earlier case, sometimes called Kennewick Man, of ancient remains in the Northwest that were fought over for years before DNA confirmed a native connection, and they were returned for reburial. The Anzac study tried to do better from the start, working with native communities and returning the child to the earth. In 2014, after the science was finished, the Anzac boy was reburied by Native nations in Montana, near where he was found with ceremony. He had given the world an extraordinary gift of knowledge. In return, he was treated not as a specimen, but as what he was, a child and an ancestor, owed rest and respect. That balance between learning from the past and honoring it is the model this field is still working to live up to. Put this discovery next to the others. The footprints at White Sands show people here more than 20,000 years ago. The cities and mounds show their descendants building wonders across the continent. And the Anzac genome ties the whole sweep together, proving that the people at the beginning and the people now are one unbroken line. 3 different kinds of evidence, footprints, earthworks, and DNA, all telling the same deep story of belonging. There is also a lesson here about who controls the past. As ancient DNA becomes more powerful, native nations are increasingly asking, rightly, to be partners in research about their own ancestors, not just subjects of it. The Anzac case helped show that science and respect are not enemies. You can make a world-changing discovery and still treat the dead and their living descendants with dignity. The future of this work depends on holding both at once. For now, the boy rests again in the Montana ground his story told, his DNA woven into the history of 2 continents. He was here at the dawn. His descendants are here still, and the line between them, once a matter of guesswork and argument, is now written plainly in the code of life itself. So go back to where we started. If you are Native American, a piece of your family tree really is buried in that Montana hillside, or it was, until he was respectfully laid back down. Anzac I is one of the oldest known members of your family, and one of the most important people ever found on this continent. He connects the beginning of the human story here to the present day. In an unbroken line, the continent had a story long before it had a name, and that story has never stopped being yours. If you want to keep following it back with me, Bedrock is just getting started. I will see you in the next one.